Good afternoon, my friends. Welcome to our New Testament challenge. Today I'm going to be sharing with you some thoughts from the ninth chapter of the book of Romans, Romans chapter 9. Now, obviously, Romans 9 comes after Romans 8. Well, Romans 8 is one of Paul's best piece of writing. He just really the term waxes eloquent. He is very eloquent in this, and it's just an incredible piece of theology, an incredible piece of hope. And it ends, he says, "For I am convinced that there is nothing," and he lists all sorts of stuff, "nothing in all of creation that will be able to separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus." And so he talks about the incredible power and beauty of God's grace. And then he comes back to a question. He's addressing questions that he is anticipating that people in Rome will ask, because maybe others have asked in other churches. But he's talking about the election of Israel by God. Has grace nullified that election? Has grace nullified God's choice of Israel? And this is important to Paul because he is Jewish. This is his heritage. This is what he grew up believing. And the image I have, the analogy I have is like this. And what he's talking to them about, there were some who believed in God and believed in the law and sought to obey the spirit of the law. And there were others who took advantage of the law. It's kind of like parents with their children. Every child ought to feel special. Every child ought to feel loved. That shouldn't be, any difference with anybody, no matter how rich or how poor you are. But then there are some who, because of their parents' wealth, power, prestige, whatever, they feel like they're even more special than someone else. Because of who they are, because of whose child they are, they feel like the law does not apply to them. And so they're arrogant, they're rude. They use their spot for not for the good of God and the glory of God, but for their own gain. And so there are some Israelites who were obedient to the law as best they could, and God blessed them. But there were some who were not. And so even the ones that were obedient, they could not completely fulfill the law. And so they were in need of grace. They were in need of forgiveness. And because they were faithful, they received that. Now that Christ has come in, they received the forgiveness of their sins. But those who treated their presence as Jews as a privilege and not a responsibility, they were the ones that experienced the wrath of God. It's kind of tough to think about. And then he goes on and he said there's some people who kind of walk through and think through this logically, and they say, well, okay, if the law does this, then why do we need the law? If it cannot save us, why should we do that? And then why does God, why does he offer grace if all this has taken place? And Paul's basically in the second half of chapter 9 basically says, hey, you're not God, neither am I, and God's choosing. God has mercy on who he has mercy, and wrath on whom he has wrath. It's his choice. And we thank God that he is he is faithful to his promises, what he says he will do. And so we have a guidebook to show us how God will act with the world. But again, if it's not there, if it's beyond, God has that choice because of who he is. And we got to be careful with that. There's one thing to question and to doubt, to wonder. Let me put it that way. There's one thing to wonder about and say, I don't know. The other thing is to be aggressive in your doubting. and say, God, how dare you do this? And I don't think God would do this. We're not in the position to tell God what to do. We're in the position to listen and to receive. So God's grace is available for all, both for the chosen people Israel and for the Gentiles as well. That, my friends, is good news. Take care, and we'll talk to you tomorrow.